Hey guys, welcome to week 7 of the 51 Yarns Spin Along. My name's Bex from the Tiny Fibre Studio podcast, and this is a series of videos which is designed to coincide with the 51 Yarns Spin Along that Ply Magazine are running on Instagram, Facebook and Ravelry. So the idea is there is a topic each week, you spin along to that topic, and on Sunday they announce a winner, and that winner wins a year's subscription to Ply Magazine, which is very cool. I am not affiliated with Ply Magazine or sponsored by them in any way, shape or form. I just find it a useful resource. And if you're looking for more information on the spin along, that is covered on their website. I will put a link in the show notes below. And it also coincides with their book, 51 Yarns to Spin Before You Cast Off, which I'm looking at as kind of a syllabus of things that I might not otherwise spin. Some of the topics are really straightforward, like last week's was 2-ply. Most spinners will have done a 2-ply at some point in their lives. Others, like this one, are ones which some of you may not have done, and I certainly had not done until this week. So I am not the world's leading authority on tail spinning. Just going to put that disclaimer out there right from the start. I have literally spun one very tiny little sample skein purely to prove to myself that I could and that it was actually worth making a video this week. So what I'm going to run through in this video is basically the 3 different types of tail spinning method that I've seen while I've been researching this week's video. And I think I should be able to demonstrate 2 of those 3. So when we say tail spinning, basically we're talking about creating a yarn that has the locks kind of hanging free somehow, perpendicular to the main yarn. While I was researching this video, I came across at least 3 different methods for tail spinning. The first of those was what I would describe as an inclusion method, and if you're interested in looking up a little bit more about this one, it's in the Leicester issue of Ply Magazine. So if you go back into that one, you'll find this article about tail spinning, and that uses 2 cores, so basically 2 commercial, preferably mohair based yarns, because it has to be super strong, and basically as you're applying those 2 commercial yarns together, you're also trapping a lock in there as well. So I came across that one and then realised I'd kind of skim read it, and I hadn't picked up the bit about it needing to be preferably a commercial mohair yarn, and I don't think I have any of that in my stash, although I might have. If I find any, I'll try and do a bonus video this week with that technique, but I don't think I have. I think I sold it when I moved house. So that was method number 1 that I came across. The second method was where you take a lock, you split it at the top, at the butt end of the lock, and you kind of spin a single along one side of it and then the other side of it, and you leave the tail kind of floating in the middle. And then the third one was where you spin a single and then you just draft in a lock. So I'm going to try and do those last 2 for you. This may end up just being me collapsing in an hysterical heap, so don't mind me if I suddenly start having a little bit of a tantrum middle of this video. Then it's just because I'm not very well practiced on this stuff, so I'm just going to give it a go and see what happens. And I think this is the beauty of this 51 yarn spin along, is that it is forcing me to do things that I just wouldn't otherwise do. Normally I don't spin a lot in the way of art yarns because I'm quite intentional with the spinning that I do, or I try to be, and I just know that it's not generally stuff that I would use, and so I just don't choose to spin a lot of it. That's not to say that I don't think that art yarn is beautiful, because I definitely do. Some art yarns are really beautiful, but I just can't see myself actually using them, and so I don't tend to spin them. When it comes to spinning equipment, I would prefer to be doing this on my mini spinner just because it's got a very wide orifice. If I take the orifice reducer out, it's got a pretty wide orifice. However, that has something else on it, which I'm preparing for next week's video. So I've pulled out my matchless. I don't have the bulky flyer for this, so this could be interesting, but I'm going to try it with some Gotland locks here that I don't think are too bulky, so I think I should be able to get them through the orifice okay. I've also got my very first drop spindle. This was provided for me as part of a class, so it's one of those big bulky drop spindles that once you actually start spinning and your yarn starts getting thinner, you find it really hard to spin on these unless you're trying to do something really bulky, because your very thin yarn just hits the deck over and over again because it's too heavy. But for this type of spinning, tail spinning, it might come in handy. So I have this as a standby, but I'm going to try and do it on the matchless. I have switched the matchless over to the slow whirl because everything that I've seen about tail spinning says be prepared to do this very slowly. So I've put it on the slow whirl. That's my preparation. So let's see how this goes. In terms of fibre, I have some Gotland locks, which are from, did I bring the bag with me? Yes, I did. Sheepfold.co.uk. I got those in the Lake District, actually on the same holiday that I came back with this one as well. If you haven't seen that story, it's in one of the early podcast videos, so check that one out. But I have a little tub here that I took to work, and this is my lunchtime project, was separating these Gotland locks out. As I was separating these, I was basically just trying to keep them as intact as possible. And there are some where I was kind of tempted to split them up more because it sort of looked like there were 2 or 3 locks within that, but you need to know your limits with this stuff. Sometimes when you start separating a lock like this one, it will end up just being a mess that you can't really use as a lock. So just be a little bit cautious of that. So I'm trying to separate them into preferably fairly thin locks. Something like this. So I think I'm going to start by trying to do the one that I test spun the other day, because at least I know there's a vague possibility I might actually be able to achieve this. So the fibre I'm going to use for this one is Wensleydale, and I have a little bag of Wensleydale locks here. When I'm choosing the locks here, I'm just trying to find things which have a decent lock shape but aren't going to be too thick to fit through the orifice. I don't want to get any fibre stuck. When I'm separating the locks, I'm just grabbing them from the lock end, the tip end, and just pulling as straight out as I can. So grabbing them at the tip end, and just pulling them out, and hopefully that leaves as much intact as possible. You will eventually get little bits that you can't really use, but that's okay. They can be blended or something else. They'll get used in some way. Okay, so this is quite a long lock, but essentially we're going to be splitting it roughly down the middle of the lock, or as much as we can. And then the idea is that you would spin this and you'd basically just continue spinning across the top of the lock, and you'd end up with a singles yarn with the lock kind of in the middle, and then you just join on the next bit. The difficulty that I found was trying to attach the next bit of fibre. I kept wanting to draft it. And of course, as soon as you start drafting it, you start pulling fibres up from inside the lock and it can destroy the lock structure a little bit. So I'm just going to slightly flick the end of the lock just to open it up a little bit. It might make it a little bit easier for me to just be able to split it open a touch. This is actually really beautiful. The main fibre itself is gorgeous. Once you flick hard that, it's so silky and lovely. I don't actually remember where I got that one, but it's from Sid Valley Fine Fibres. I have a feeling this was from Wonderwool. Not my last visit, but maybe the visit before. So I'm just going to start getting a little bit of twist in. Okay, so I've got twist going into that first section. And then when it comes to this next section, what I need to try not to do is to try drafting. I don't want to draft at all. I just want to spin straight across the top of that lock. And then I've got a little bit hanging down, the little tail. So this was the bit that I was finding really tricky when I was doing my test sample, because I would get to this stage and then I would want to kind of draft the second butt end to the other one. But I think I just need to not draft at all and just let the twist travel across. Something like that. I feel like that there is a huge amount of twist in this right now. And I could treadle slower. I think I might be asking a bit much of my brake band to go up to the next pulley, but maybe I might be okay. Let's see. Yeah, might be all right. All I'm doing to join the next one in is literally just letting the twist flow from one to the other. Putting a little tiny bit of twist in, and then just allowing the lock to just flick perpendicular, like rotate around the outside of the yarn. I don't know how structurally sound this yarn would be, to be honest, but it's okay. It seems to be, you know, holding at the moment. The tricky thing that I know I'm going to have to watch out for with this is as the yarn goes through the hooks, I'm just trying to make sure that nothing gets caught on there, particularly with some of the larger locks. I'm also thinking maybe if I join the fibre in a little bit earlier, maybe. Yeah, I think you do have to be prepared to literally just put about 3 twists in and just kind of let it go. I keep feeling like there's loads and loads and loads of twist in it, but I think if it's holding together, then I probably just have to stop worrying about it and just go with it. So I am manually winding this on a little bit. I don't want this to get all tangled up as it goes through the hooks. So I'm just making sure that it all goes on fairly evenly and doesn't get caught around anything. There is a little bit here where I feel like it's going to drift apart. It's really thin. Yeah. That was where I didn't do the join properly, actually, come to think about it. So let me try and flick that back out again. And try catching that in again. So when I'm joining the next lock in, I'm just trying to use as close to a normal worsted join as possible. So putting the fibre alongside at a slight angle and then just letting the twist go in. Normally if I was doing a worsted join, I would draft forwards slightly, taking the new fibre in with it. But in this case, I can't really do that because there's nothing to draft. So I'm just having to join the fibre in and just let it go, which feels really weird. I'm like, oh, you know, structurally this is going to be awful, but it seems to be fine. It's holding together, so I'm just going to stop worrying about it. So that's a little bit of that format of lock spinning. So take a distinct lock that is roughly the same diameter as the other locks that you're using. Give it a little flick if you choose at the butt end. Just to loosen those fibres up and particularly to allow them to join to the previous one. Split it at the top of the lock. And then when you come to join the next one on, just put a tiny bit of twist in, hold the new fibre out to the side slightly, and then just let the twist go into that section of the fibre. You can't really do any drafting as far as I can see because you would mess up the lock structure if you did that. But that is how I have done my first little bit of lock spinning. It's not particularly tidy, particularly in the areas where there's a join, and I don't know how structurally sound that would be, but it looks okay, and I think you could probably do some kind of wrap perhaps to make it a little bit stronger. But that is the first version of lock spinning that I came across when I started doing my research. So I'm just doing a little bit at the end of my sample skein that is not tailspun, so that when or if I ever actually use this in some way, then at least there will be a section that I can cast on with that doesn't have lots of bits of lock everywhere. So I'm just going to finish doing a little bit of that, and then I will show you the second technique that I found. I'm just spinning a little bit just on the end of the bobbin to make sure that if I actually use this at any point, I've got some cast on available. If I would imagine that if you're trying to cast on something that involves lots of locks floating around, it's probably not the easiest thing in the world. So I'm going to just spin a little bit of just standard singles so that I've got something to cast on with. And then that is my finished tailspun. My first attempt. I'm going to put a little bit more twist in this last section. Okay, I'm going to take this off onto a niddy noddy, and then I will show you the second option that I found in terms of techniques. Yeah, there we go. See, I mentioned that I didn't think this was a particularly strong join. I might have to spit splice that because that just fell apart as I was getting to it. So there we go, very, very, very small amounts of tailspun yarn, but that's okay for a little sample, that's fine. I was right, it was not particularly structurally sound because as I was putting it onto the niddy noddy, there was one point where it did split. So not structurally sound, but you know, quite pretty. I quite like that one. Okay, so that is first little sample skein done, and it is very little. When people said, like, be prepared for this to take a long time, they were absolutely right. It does take a long time. It's it's quite pretty. I quite like it. It'll be interesting to try and knit a little teeny weeny swatch with it, but I don't mind that technique. It's quite easy relatively. My only concern is that the joins aren't particularly strong, and I think that would concern me long term if I was doing a particular project with it. So that was one version of the technique, and the second one that I wanted to try and show you was one where you spin a singles with the same fibre as the locks, but not with the locks themselves, and then just every so often you just join a lock in. I'm gonna see how that goes. Once again, not an expert in tail spinning. Can you tell? I think this is one of the things that I really like about the 51 Yarns challenge, is that even though it's my own choice to make these videos, and therefore, you know, this is all my own volition, I'm kind of forced occasionally to confront yarns which are not in my standard repertoire. Because this definitely isn't in my standard repertoire at all. Okay, so next up I'm going to be working with this Gotland, and I'm just having a look. There were some bits of fibre actually that I chose not to pick out of the locks. This is like the waist where I'd pretty much picked out as much of the intact locks as I could, and I was kind of left with less intact bits. So I'm going to use these as the base yarn for this. Okay, so let's try and get a little bit of base yarn going on here. Oh, I don't know why, but I'm finding this really difficult today. It's a bit annoying. Anyway, cool. So I've got a little bit of the standard yarn in. Then I'm gonna, I don't know whether to even flick this out or whether to just like chuck it in and see what happens. I feel like you would kind of have to chuck it in a little bit. But then the problem is you look at the rest of the locks and you're like, well, which bits do I sacrifice? Because they're all so pretty. And I don't really want to use any of them. So I think they were then joining the fibre back in before the lock, like this. Yeah, something like that, maybe. I did warn you that this might just be me in hysterics desperately trying to do something with tail spinning. So I've been doing the second technique for a little while now, and I think I've kind of got the hang of it enough to be able to actually try to show you. So in this version, what I'm doing is I've got some locks that I'm going to be using as part of the singles, and some locks that I'm going to be actually using as locks in the tailspun. I'm just doing a little bit of flick carding to the ones that I'm kind of sacrificing as singles yarn, and I'm spinning a section of that, and then when it comes time to join in the next lock, I'm just grabbing that lock. I haven't been doing any flick carding of this, but I guess you could see what happens if you flick card it. So just a little bit of a flick, and I can just join that in, but I'm joining it in pretty much perpendicular until I've got it all caught in. and it will start kind of wrapping around itself completely perpendicular to the yarn. So then I take my singles fibre and I catch that in, but I'm catching it in before the lock. And the reason that I'm doing that is that if that happens, then there is at least a fibre or two kind of looping in around the back of that lock where it joins to the yarn. If you're doing this as I am on a wheel and a fly that wasn't entirely designed for it, just make sure that you check every so often to make sure there's nothing significantly caught around the flyer hooks. So there we go, that's two different versions of tail spinning. I hope that somehow, in some way, seeing me struggle through or experiment with doing this tail spinning has encouraged you to maybe have a go this week. This video, of course, will always be available in the future, so if you need to come back to it, it's here. But those were a couple of the techniques that I found, and I wanted to show that I still have a lot of learning to do, as we all do. There's always new stuff to learn. There are always new techniques to try out and see if you think they work or see if you can improve them. Of these two techniques, I think it would probably be the second one that I would choose, although possibly with less length of section in between. I just feel like it's going to be a bit more structurally sound than the first version because of the joins. I just think the joins are a little bit easier to do on that second version. I would definitely be interested to try the plied version, but like I say, I don't think I have any mohair, commercial mohair in my house at the moment. If I suddenly find it, I will do a bonus video this week. But I hope this has been useful for you, and if it has, I would love it if you could give me a thumbs up, drop me a comment. Let me know if you have any suggestions for these videos as well. I'm always open to people's feedback, so please let me know if there's something that you like or don't like, and I will endeavour to try to change that in the future. And I think that's it for this week. In between now and next week, which is self-striping, you can find me on Instagram as Tiny Fibre Studio, and on Ravelry I'm Ibex. Hope this was useful. Enjoy the rest of your spinning for this week, and I will see you again next week.